Hello there, YouTube, Mr. Gibson Guy. Thanks for stopping by the channel. Glad to have you here. Today I have a brief video that I'm going to make for you. This is a continuation of the last video I did where I told you that in my collection of cameras I had kind of reached a saturation point where every camera or lens or accessory that I dreamed I would be able to get one day, I got it. And now I kind of wore the list down to just about nothing. There's a couple of camera bodies that would still be of interest to me and a couple of lenses I wouldn't mind getting, but nothing that's really itching at me very badly to get. And so I kind of fell into this intermediate place. It's like, well, that's not very exciting when there's not really anything to look for because you already got it. But then this came upon me as just recently, and it was just kind of a logical progression of what you would expect if you go back from the 1975 to 1985 and you look at the final act for the manual focus 35mm cameras. That if you don't want to go into the autofocus, and I'm not interested in the digital. I got digital cameras all around me, but I use those for YouTube. That's the idea. I have digital stuff to make YouTube videos, but my real interest in photography is all in analog, manual focused cameras from the golden age. So if you're not going to go forward in time, the only other thing you can do back is go back, and that is indeed where I am. So I'm making this little video to show everybody, because there's a lot of people interested in camera collecting as well as camera shooting and using old cameras, because a lot of us recognize the beauty of these old things, and they may be archaic to other people, but they're just things of beauty to us. And so I made this giant leap backwards. Instead of going back 40 years or 50 years, I'm going back 70 years, or maybe longer. And I studied up on these and found there's a lot of really interesting cameras, and some of them are real expensive. Some of them are not very expensive, surprisingly inexpensive considering their age, and in surprisingly good condition. So I settled on what I decided was going to start this new wing of the collection, and that is in some classic rangefinder cameras. These are from the 1950s, so that's putting them over 70 years old, and there's a good number of them, quite a few. They have some lens interchangeability with certain cameras and lenses, and there are other lenses which you can adapt to other cameras if you get an adapter to them, and some of them you're just stuck. You got to have this camera and that camera. But this is an example of the 1950s rangefinder's cameras. This was made by Canon. This particular model is a 2D, and one of their earliest ones, and this is a very direct copy of a Leica 3, which when you see the name for this, if you look it up on eBay or something, it's going to be a Canon 2D, and the 2 is 2 small letter I's, which is for Roman numeral 1. And the Leica 3 that it's a copy of, you'll see that written as 3 lowercase i's. So they kind of use the same, it's almost got the exact same name in it. There is a Canon 2 and there was an original Canon. But this one I decided to go with for my first rangefinder, because this one, a couple of reasons. One is this one was surprisingly low priced, and it's the one that's probably the best copy of the Leica 3 that you can get. And so if you really want to have a Leica 3 experience and you want to spend under $200, go with one of these. That's with the lens. There's a lot of these Canons, and they're built to last for a millennium. They just go and go for generation after generation after generation, and nothing will happen to them. These things are absolute tanks, and they're a little bit heavy, but they're that well made. Canon's building copies of Leica eventually affected Leica and made Leica have to copy Canon with their copies of Leicas. If you can follow that, then that's what happened. But these are some of the original ones, and then what happened was these camera companies, Canon and Nikon and Konica and Minolta and Yashica, all these different companies that were making clones of Leicas, started putting improvements on them, started making better Leicas. And so Leica eventually, after the war, they had been making the 1, 2, and 3, and after, in the early 50s, then these other companies were making such good Leicas that Leica had to come out with the M3 and M4. They had to come up with a whole different camera. And that was the modernized version of these pre-war cameras that they were making. And just to look at the values, this camera, I don't remember what the price was. I think it was a little, $198 or $195 or something like that. It was a pretty reasonable price with the lens. It's in beautiful condition all the way through. Let you see the top plate. This is so great. This is an important part for Leica because they engrave their information up here, and so does the other companies. But this camera was a great deal, and if I wanted to get the original Leica 3 that this is the copy of, it would cost more than the entire display that I have up there. All that stuff would be about the cost of one Leica 3. But I have a copy that's such a good copy, you could take parts off of the Canon and use them as spares on your Leica. And indeed, there's some Canon inventions that were used on these cameras that Leica didn't know about, and people would buy a Canon to take the stuff off and put it on their Leica. But then they came out with their M series, M3 and M4, and those cameras were updated rangefinders. And so that's the last thing I want to talk to you about on this video with this introduction to the 2D Canon, is if you are a SLR shooter and you've been shooting 35 millimeter film out of a manual focus camera for a while, and you've gotten that experience with your Pentax K1000 or your Canon AE1, and you want to take it to a new level of involvement for the photographer, you might want to think about going into these rangefinder cameras. They are really beautiful, magnificent works of art to me when I see one. But they are rather idiosyncratic, as they have a bunch of things like, we have fast shutter speed here and then slow shutter speeds chosen down here. And you have a dial that's your counter, but you have to set it yourself to when you start a new frame. Or you have to take the bottom off the camera to put the film in. There's a whole bunch of different rangefinder features that were developed after 1930 when Leica first came out with their version of this camera. And if you want to get a rangefinder camera, which is a true rangefinder, which looks like a rangefinder, but not quite as messy as this, a lot more streamlined, but it has modern day shutter speed dial, and just one, not two of them. It has an automatic reset on the frame counter to count your how many exposures you have. That happens when you pull up the handle and the back door swings out for you to put film in. If you want to get rid of some of those idiosyncrasies of the 1920s cameras and go with the 1950s version, this is what you want to look for: a Canon P. The Canon P was their equivalent in the 1950s of the Canon AE1. It was their camera for the masses, for people who wanted to shoot the camera of the day, which was in the early 50s was still the rangefinder cameras like this, but ones that had the more modern conveniences that made it pretty simple to shoot by comparison. They have separate ones that do have light meters on them. I don't like them because this light meter's a big old thing on top and it makes the thing look really unbalanced. I like the part about deciding the exposure myself, using another camera or a light meter, or just guessing from what I think the light meter should say. And that's what I'm going to be doing for the next month or so. I'm going to be just concentrating, maybe a couple months, on just shooting this camera and getting mastery of it, where I can really control all the different functions, which I'm still learning right now. But if you want to get your best results and have a classic rangefinder camera, maybe not as classic as this, but one that's still has the rangefinder challenges, which are challenges. It's got to get used to this whole eyepiece thing and not looking through the lens, because these don't have mirrors in them. They're not reflex cameras. But the Canon P, there's lots of them because they sold lots of them. The prices are really very inexpensive. You can, around $100 or a little over that, you can get the camera with a lens all ready to go in really nice shape. And the way that they constructed these things made them bulletproof. And so when they get to be 60 or 70 or 80 years old, they still look like they're new. Just amazing work that they did on these things. So I wanted to pass that information on to you. Now, if you're a Nikon guy, there's the Nikon S series, S2, S3, and then they go up to the SP. But what happens is with the Nikons, the Canons are really reasonably priced because they put a lot out. The Nikons put out a lot, but not as many. And the prices nowadays on those old cameras can start to rival Leicas. So the Nikons are nice. I'll probably get one or two, but I'm not going to go crazy over them. Canon, you can have a whole series of these rangefinder cameras for all the different models that they made, and at crazy, ridiculous prices still, and have stuff that's collectible. But that's my brief take on the Canon rangefinders and about doing rangefinder photography. It's a new challenge and make you think very differently about how you shoot your pictures and how it's done, what is involved in it, and a whole lot of new fun instead of doing the same thing over and over again. All right, so I hope you found this informative. Leave me a comment below. Do you have a rangefinder camera, or are you playing with SLRs and you're thinking about one? Put a comment down below and let us know about it. Glad to hear from people. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. Subscribers are going up, and this channel is continuing to grow, and I hope that I can put out good stories for you and some good information which will be helpful. You're interested in hearing about histories of these? Because it's very interesting. All right, until you hear from me next time, this is Mr. Gibson Guy, and I'm out of here.